Hello and welcome to Lifeology Module 1, Scientific Philosophy. In this series, we'll discuss the philosophical foundations and implications of science, its ideological development, how to use it correctly, and the hows and whys of its all too common misuse. To begin, we'll start with an exercise meant to calibrate students' current understanding and resonance with certain scientific statements. As I go through them, I want you to take note of whether you agree or disagree with them one at a time. But don't think too deeply yet as to why. The first statement is, the flu is caused by a virus. Second statement, atoms are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Statement 3, the universe began with the Big Bang. Statement 4, memories are stored in the brain. And number 5, we live within a multiverse. Now that we've gone through for each of these statements that you felt yourself leaning towards agreement with, I want you to consider why that is. You might be surprised to learn that every single one of these statements can be contested in some way through scientific argumentation. Now, getting into the weeds of those discussions, at least right now, would veer us off from the point that I'm trying to make here. It's far too early for that. What I'm doing here is just testing and calibrating the assumptions that we have towards scientific information so that we can reflect on this peculiar phenomenon of how we adopt many different worldviews without fully assessing them first. I'd be willing to bet a large sum that at least most, but probably all of the agreements or disagreements you had with any of these 5 points hasn't come from your own efforts at doing science to confirm them, but rather they're assumptions you hold by virtue of living in the time and place that we all currently reside. Most of these are taken for granted by virtually everyone within modern, Western, or globalized societies. But pretty much everyone, including scientists themselves, only really believe them because an authority figure of some sort, a parent, teacher, book, etc., told them that this was the case. And it's likely that those authority figures adopted the beliefs in much the same way. So in this lesson, I hope to confront students with this phenomenon, present within all of us, where we build a worldview based on assumptions and hearsay rather than careful examination of facts, logic, and experimentation, and how, if we plan to cultivate a philosophical and scientific mind, we must be willing and able to notice this in ourselves and try to keep it in check. Thus, there are 4 foundational statements that I'd like to make before we get into this lesson that must be borne in mind if one is to continue with Lifeology and, in my view, undergo any form of true education anywhere and at any time. The first statement, everything that you think you know might be wrong. Number 2, everything you learn in any science class, including this one, might be wrong. Number 3, the most important type of learning that you can do in your life is unlearning the things that you think you know. And number 4, the above statements are central to the philosophy of science, but professional scientists seem to often forget about them. So for this introduction, let's do one more illustration. This circle here represents the whole of all the information that there is to possibly know. Of course, the word know is somewhat loaded since it often carries a connotation of total assurance in some piece of information. But all knowledge is potentially false knowledge and should remain expendable in circumstances where better information presents itself. That said, if we use this circle to make a pie chart, we'll say that this first slice represents everything that we know, or at least think we know, about all of the topics we've ever learned about. This next slightly larger segment represents the information about which we're ignorant, or the known unknowns. In other words, this is information that we are aware that we could gather, but haven't yet for whatever reason. Maybe we just haven't had time, or we haven't had the interest, or any number of other reasons. For example, I personally don't know that much about how cars work, but I know that that information is out there should I ever feel inclined to put the time aside to learn it. Finally, the rest of this pie chart represents our nescience, or the unknown unknowns. That information about which we are currently completely unable to even conceive of as variables to be considered when building any sort of worldview. An example might be when people are unaware of esoteric interpretations of holy texts or relatively obscure revisionist theories within science and history. We might also say that most people from the past were completely nescient that something like the internet could ever come to exist, because it was completely outside their frame of reference. Realistically, the knowledge and ignorance segments should be much smaller than they are here, but for the sake of illustration, I've greatly exaggerated their proportion. And obviously, for each individual, the topics which fall under each of these three categories will be constellated differently. As I mentioned, I'm ignorant about the mechanical engineering of a car, but if I bring my car to an auto shop, chances are I'll be interacting with a person who is by no means ignorant of that information, but might instead be ignorant about biology. That's what we get while living in a complex society. Different people have different backgrounds and interests, and hopefully, by maintaining a variety of all these different types of people, we compensate for the weaknesses and shortcomings within everybody else. So with these preliminary points stated, let's take a deep dive into what science is, how it works, what its tenets are, and how it can be misused. This is a behemoth of a topic, I know, and now is when I give the obligatory disclaimer that there's no way that I can cover every single relevant point here. This lesson is enormous enough as it is, even after the many cuts that I've made along the way as I've been developing it. However, I feel that you'll still find the remainder of this presentation quite useful, especially as you're navigating the information age, and it will serve as the epistemological basis on which all of Lifeology rests. It's probably going to need some tweaks, revisions, and addendums down the road, but for now, I think it should suffice. So here is the roadmap for how this lesson will proceed from here. Section 1, I've titled The Philosophical Foundations of Science. Section 2, The Basic Methodologies of Science. Section 3, Methodological Critiques. Section 4, The Paradigm of Modern Science. Section 5, Paradigmatic Critiques. Section 6 is on scientific communication and how scientific narratives are formed. Section 7 I've titled Why the Deceptions. I think that will be a very interesting one. Section 8, Concluding Remarks. And Section 9, Towards a New Approach. So let's get started.